turning it over to Nancy. Well, first, thanks everyone for being here. It's really nice to see you all. This is class 5 of our 8-week precept study. And if anyone is interested in formally taking Jukai, we will have a ceremony, so it's not too late to touch base with me if you're interested in doing that. I put my email in the chat box. It's probably kind of up there a ways. But if you're interested or just wanting to have more of a conversation about what that's about, even if, you know, for whatever reason, just feel free to send me an email. And so I think that's everything. Little housekeeping things. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy, who is going to lead us, offer some thoughts and lead us in discussion on the great precept about intoxication. So thank you, Nancy, so much for preparing and being willing to do this.
Okay, so the precept says, do not become intoxicated, polish clarity, dispel delusion. In the realm of the intrinsically pure Dharma, not harboring delusions is the precept of not becoming intoxicated. We are naturally pure. There is nothing to be deluded about. This is enlightenment itself. Understand this truly, and no intoxicants can be taken in. So some of you may be aware that I worked with intoxicated individuals for many years. So I'm very familiar with the normal alcohol drug ones. We need to acknowledge there's something called substitute addictions, which would be sex, shopping, gambling, overeating, and there's a 12-step program for everything you can imagine. So those are all part of the intoxication, because one of the definitions of intoxication is any distraction, the way that we grasp at things in order to forget where we are. So social media has become a very big intoxicant these days. And I've used the study guide. As you know, I am not a studier of Buddhist literature, but I have used the study guide, precept study guide. So I'm going to be working from that. One of the things that Choan has talked about is that he said that his primary intoxication was opinions and the belief that things had to be a certain way. So I think we all can relate to that. I think one of my distractions, my intoxicants, and when I mentioned it at dinner tonight, my husband agreed completely, would be wanting to be in control. Just keep things in control, got to be in control. So, so part of that is, there was a statement that I came across that I don't think was Buddhist necessarily, but it said that a knowledge of the truth can dissipate an illusion or delusion. So I wanted to take a look at truth. And in the 3 treasures, it says at the source, the highest truth is called the Buddha treasure. So there's talking about truth there. In the past, those who realize the truth completely are called the Buddha treasure. So there is something called truth. And when I tried to think about what that would be, the first one that came to my mind is impermanence, that there is a concept of impermanence that we believe is the truth of all beings, that there is nothing but impermanence. So that would be one aspect of truth. In this reading, Dogen says, we are naturally pure. So I'd like to think that that could also be a statement of truth, that in fact, at our core, we are naturally pure. we are here to come back to that purity, to find that place. And then the third statement of truth is that there is only the present moment. That is what we're doing here through the meditation, meditation is one of the primary ways. And again, Kyogen talks about that as being a way when we sit on the cushion, and even if our mind goes elsewhere, we bring it back, we keep bringing it back, we keep bringing it back to the present moment through our breath. So that's part of what, in terms of polishing clarity and dispelling delusion, would be the sense that meditation is a way of getting at a truth. And there may be others besides what I mentioned, but any fears or thoughts of the past or future are not in the present moment, so they are not part of the truth. When we go into our fears or projecting into the future, we are not in the present moment, and presumably we would want to come back to the present moment, either just in our own thinking, that we notice that we've gone away, that we come back to our breath, whether we're meditating or driving or whatever it is, we can always come back to that present moment. And presumably, the more we do that, the more we polish clarity and dispel delusion. So one of the questions that I would like to ask is, what is your primary intoxicant? What is your primary way of getting away from the present moment? And I'll just mention that when I was meditating one morning a week or so ago, and I was thinking about this because I was not in the present moment. I was thinking about this presentation instead, thinking about coming into polishing clarity. And at that moment, the clouds broke and the sun came through. And I thought, well, isn't that perfect? That's exactly what we want. We want to break through the clouds. We want to break through the delusions and all, and the sun shines through, and we have the pure light. We have the moment of clarity. So again, I come back to hopefully some discussion here of what is your primary intoxicant? What takes you away from the current moment, the present moment? And the floor is open.
I can speak to that. Pretty much what isn't my intoxicant. Everything. If it passes in front of my eyes, I follow it like a shiny object. I think that my primary intoxicant would be fantasy. I have a vivid imagination, and I like my fantasies, and I feed them, with all sorts of ways. So I think that's a great question. Thank you for asking that question.
Okay. And it's good to just identify it. We are not going to change it in a moment, but it's good to know that it's there. We can always come back to our breath. Who else?
I think for me, I think I chase after maybe organization, trying to get my life much more organized. And, when it's really hard for me to just sit, because it's like, I got to go take care of that pile of papers, or I've got to go take care of that task, or I can't just sit here. I don't have time to do that. I'm never going to get to where I want to get if I don't go over there and do that. So I don't know how to articulate that, but it's almost probably when you said control. It's like trying to grasp on to control of things. And if I'm just sitting here, I'm not able to feel like I'm doing anything to move towards that goal. So, kind of living in the future instead of being in this moment. So,
Thank you. Yes, I identify with that very much so. And then I add the statement, I'm getting, I might forget it if I don't do it right now. So I better just get up and do it, and then it'll be done, because I might forget it. So, Joshin, were you going to say something?
Nope, I think I was just nodding my head at like
okay.
hearing all those responses going, yep, yep.
I have to echo what Keiko said. Sometimes I think it's everything, but I don't know that it's necessarily the things that are the delusions. It's what's going on in my head that's the delusion. The actual intoxicants are just distractions. It's being unable to stop the whirl of thoughts that's the real delusion maker.
Yeah. And I think in reading about this in the study guide and all, that anything that takes us out of the present moment is called a delusion. So it doesn't have to be something that's unreal. It just isn't the present moment. So there isn't a mental health component to this. It is just, in my understanding, that to dispel delusion is to be wandering anywhere in the past and the future, rather than in the present moment.
I'll share one. I would say that all the news apps on my phone are my current, my current intoxicant and distraction. And I so love what you said about control, because I think I'm looking for the news to be different. I'm just looking for it to be different, and just kind of waiting for that release so that it's different. One of the things,
different and good.
what was that?
Different in a good way.
Yeah, different, and again, it's that kind of pushing away of what is, right? It's that kind of trying to. I was reading Reb Anderson's book, and he talks about this precept of being one where we're trying to manipulate reality, which I really like that phrase, really stuck in my head, manipulating reality. How am I trying to manipulate my reality by whatever intoxicant I'm taking in? That really.
I would like to manipulate the reality of the floor I work on in the hospital, because it is so overwhelming. And I would just I would like all of the nurses just to stay still for 2 minutes so I can figure out who you are. Always.
I think the statement that you made, Shantai, I'm trying to remember, there's something here that also was from Kyogen, but I'm not finding it at the moment. But again, we don't always have time, or we don't make time to meditate, especially those of you that actually work. There's always the suggestion when you're waiting for the elevator, you stop and you come back to your breath. When you're waiting at a red light, you stop and you come back to your breath. That's a good idea. I ought to try it sometime.
I think for me, this is very un-Buddhist, but there are times I don't want to be mindful. I want to escape into some other reality. And so I'm looking at that, because there are other moments when I'll take that moment to really be present, to see what's happening around me and experience things. But there are other moments I just want to get away and escape somewhere else. Be it, in a book or in a TV show or something else.
I certainly identify with that, yes.
Well, and it's kind of the koan of self-care, right? You know, because I love to do like the little mini New York Times crossword puzzle, and it's like it takes me like 2 minutes, and I realize it's like because I just totally drop everything and like try to race through it for those 2 minutes, and it just gives you this mental break, this mental reset. But then it always seems like it's on this continuum. So if I spent all day doing crossword puzzles, maybe that would probably be breaking the precept. But taking those little mental breaks to refresh. So it is a koan. You know, only I can know
Yes.
when it goes too far.
Well,
I have the same thing. I
mine is
think
a
oh, sorry.
Sunday LA Times crossword, which takes 45 minutes to an hour. And I think of that as self-care. I just need to relax. I need to clear out my brain. But I am only allow myself one a day unless I'm on an airplane. So, and I'm retired. So, you know, I have more time. So.
I was going to say, I don't know that doing the crossword as a mental health issue is not being in the moment. You're in that moment.
Yes.
You're taking care of yourself. That is a moment.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Just to kind of piggyback on that. So my addiction or intoxicant has been also like just keeping up with the news cycle, specifically through Twitter. And I just noticed that it was making me crazy because, you know, everybody's opinion is on there. And so kind of along those same lines, I deleted Twitter from all of my devices. And if I want to look at Twitter, I just look at it on my computer and I spend a few minutes looking at Twitter. And, you know, like, I feel like that's okay. Like, I'm not doom scrolling, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I feel like it's not like Twitter is bad or evil or anything like that. But if you're giving yourself a couple minutes to enjoy it, you know, then it's not terrible.
It's when it takes over.
Yes, exactly.
Grasping at it. I've been unsubscribing from a lot of emails because I must get 50 to 75 emails a day, of which probably 5 are relevant. The others are asking either for money or for me to sign a petition. So yeah, it's whether or not it takes over. I think Twitter's the same way. So Shantai, I suspect that we are kind of finished with this topic. And
Great.
to Choan.
Thank you very, very much, Nancy.
You're welcome.
And so with that, we will turn it over to Choan to lead us in discussion of not dwelling on past mistakes.
Oh, thank you, you guys. I'm probably going to have to look over and read because I definitely have some things that I want to read, and I don't want to get too far off track. So first I'm going to read the 6th precept. Do not dwell on past mistakes. Create wisdom from ignorance. In the realm of the flawless Dharma, not expounding upon error is the precept of not dwelling on past mistakes. In the Buddha Dharma, there is one path, one Dharma, one realization, one practice. Do not engage in fault finding. Do not condone haphazard talk. So before I go on, I want to let you know that a lot of what I pulled from tonight, for tonight, came from The Mind of Clover, Robert Etkin, Wild Country Zen, Hardcore Zen, and the Zen Peacemakers. Our teachers at Wy'East, and some of the stuff came from our teachers at Dharma Reign. So I definitely want to give credit to them for some of the resources that I pulled. So one of the things that popped up was Ginkgo had did a Dharma talk at Dharma Rain on this precept. And one of the things she pointed out was a lot of times in our dwelling, do not dwell on past mistakes. When we're dwelling, a lot of different responses come up. And she pointed out that guilt, paralysis, defensiveness, anger, defiance, confusion can be things that come up when we're dwelling, when we actually notice that we're dwelling and sit back and kind of notice and be curious about what we're feeling when we're doing those things. And when I'm working with this precept, I experience a ton of guilt. It seems like, especially in the past when we've worked with our precepts over the years, and I thought this was interesting. I noticed that usually I'm thinking about my mistakes. And I have a lot of guilt. I hold on to, I mean, I remember when I got just kind of spoke nasty, mean, kind of snippy with my grandmother when I was 13 years old. She had chastised me for something, and I got really kind of snippy with her. And I am not kidding. I have held that guilt, that mistake. I'm 60, and that still is the first thing that pops up for me. I'm like, how could I ever spoke to my grandmother like that? So I think that when I was going through some of the resources, what popped out on to me was focusing on other people's mistakes. And it's not that I don't do that. I think just in the past, when I've read this precept, I always go to my mistakes when I'm really focusing on this. And there was a notation that back historically, some of the versions of this precept was the Buddha is saying that the disciple must not himself broadcast the misdeeds or infractions of bodhisattvas, laypersons, ordinary monks, or nuns, and do not encourage other people to do that. And so there was basically this precept put forth, you're not going to criticize other people in the Sangha. So I thought that was really interesting. And then this precept arises from a bodhisattva effort to build agreement and understanding within the Sangha, not to alienate, not to point out the misdeeds and infractions. So it really, it guides us into agreement, to understanding, to see perfection, and to speak about compassion, not slander, to cultivate and encourage respectful speech. So it really, I think it just really points us away from that negative stuff, that judging mind, the comparing mind, the relative, and just really brings us back to being in the moment, focusing on the positive, and it kind of talks a lot about to our ego too. I think it does speak a lot to our ego and because when you are comparing something to somebody else, there's some aspect of thinking something is better and something is worse, or I do it better than them, or they do it worse than I do. So I think that kind of points to our ego also. I want to read one of the couple things that came up when I was looking through some of the stuff from Dharma Rain. We have ethical guidelines at Dharma Reign, and there is a book that they put out a little book, and you can find it on the website. But one of the things that it said was lay disciples, because they are formally connected to the center and the lineage. We expect lay disciples to conduct their private lives in a way that would reflect well on the temple. We expect them to be honest and ethical in their personal and business dealings, to be faithful in personal relationships, and to be generally law-abiding good citizens of the community. These matters, when they do not involve temple duties, are not a matter of the Ethics Council, except under extraordinary circumstances. They are generally considered training issues between the disciple and his or her teacher. The ethical guidelines for informal teaching relationships, however, apply to lay disciples when they act as practice advisors, when they are leading retreats, classes, workshops, or whenever someone comes to them for advice or guidance because of their position as a lay disciple. Also, because of their increased visibility within the Sangha, they should be mindful of the perception of authority new members will have regarding them, and be careful of inadvertently taking undue advantage. Kindness and consideration for newer members becomes more important because of the perceived authority held by lay disciples. I bring that up because I feel like it perfectly fits into this precept. I honestly have to say that when I read that, I don't know how many times over the years that I've been practicing that I've actually stepped back and thought, I am being a reflection of my temple. When people look at me, they also see my Sangha. It's that walking that talk. And I don't know that I've ever thought about that necessarily. I think that it's always been, it's my practice. I have to work on this. This is between me and my teacher. What I tell my teacher is confidential. I don't know that I've ever really, it's kind of like at work being in Multnomah County. When I'm a nurse in Multnomah County, I'm representing Multnomah County. And, you know, I could show up in a newspaper if I've said or did something that, you know, looked bad for taxpayers, you know, that nurse did this or whatever. And I just don't think that I've ever really thought about that, that I need to reflect well on my temple. That really put a different, I guess, accountability that I had never really thought about before. The other thing that came up was Dharma in the guidelines is that it states that within the three treasures of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, relationship should reflect these refuges. In practice, we should cultivate an attitude of respect and recognize the reciprocal relationship between respect and kindness. And I think in both of those guidelines, if we're not practicing this precept, it would go against every bit of that guideline. If we're pointing out faults, if we're pointing out what somebody did wrong, I think that really does absolutely go against these guidelines that have been given to us. I thought there was a lot of different versions out there, different ways that different sanghas, different temples had worded this precept. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but there was a couple that one said, self-nature is inconceivably wondrous in the faultless Dharma. Not talking about sins and mistakes is not talking about other faults and errors. And then another one said the self-nature is sacred and profound in the midst of the faultless Dharma. Not to speak of faults, this is called the precept of not finding faults with others. So I don't know. I found that as I dug deeper, there was just so many more layers that came up with this precept than I tend to be a little black and white. And I think that many times when I've looked at this precept, I really didn't peel back all of those layers. I just went right to the mistakes and dwelled on them. It really kind of took me to that dwelling on those mistakes instead of doing what the precept has guided me to do. So I think it was really good for me to look at that. Some of the questions that I have, and I'll just read all three of them, and I'd love to hear some discussion around these questions. One of them, even though these ethical guidelines are pointing to a lay disciple, even if I had not taken a teacher, or really even if I had not went through Jukai, I asked the group, would these ethical guidelines pertain to all of us within the Sangha? Does it really matter if we have taken Jukai or if we have taken on a teacher? Wouldn't these guidelines, these ethical guidelines, pertain to all of us? The next one is, are there ways that you find that build relationships and support the triple treasures without dwelling and perseverating on areas that you felt that you may not have acted as skillfully as you would have liked to? And then the other one, what do you personally do to bring yourself out of that dwelling and move you back into the present moment? So thank you for allowing me to kind of discuss this and just bring forth some of the things that arose for me. And I'd love to hear more about what touched you or what your thoughts were.
I think it's interesting that you brought up the role of a lay disciple in this. I had never thought of it that way. For me, this one speaks on a more personal level. As far as marriage goes, bringing up past faults is pretty much an entire art form. You remember that time when you did that? Wasn't that so funny? No, it wasn't. Not to them. Was it? Oh, don't do that like you did last time. No. And what about last week when you? No. And if you don't bring those things up, life is much smoother. It's hard to bite the tongue and learn a new version of conversation, but I think it's just general wisdom overall.
Thank you. I know that, even I think it was Lexi. Yeah, Lexi even brought out, sometimes for me, I know that I had wrote it in some of my notes, and I think I skipped over the piece about sometimes there's moments that I want to be in my Buddhist box. And there's other times, like on social media, like we were talking about, there are really other times that I just go, I really hope that none of my teachers are reading what I'm posting right now on Facebook. But I really feel like I have to say this. And I want to, compartmentalize my, my practice. It's like, I want to be in my practice over here and be in this box. But right now, I really do want to step out of that box and say what I want to say, or point out the fault or the error of thinking. So I think you're right, Shirley. I think that if we could really step away, Dixie, if we could really step away from that, and we'd probably really have much more healthy relationships if we could kind of zip it sometimes and not take it upon ourselves to say those things. Anybody else?
Let's see. Yeah. I liked both the discussions we've had and thinking about both of them. And, but I think some of the things you said, um, I had never thought about this precept of dwelling on past mistakes uh, and take wisdom from ignorance. I hadn't thought about it kind of the way you pointed out, so I'm going to think about that a lot. But I think the third question that you asked is, I can't remember exactly your words, but about personally. And I was thinking, I went through a period recently, and I've been through this period off and on in the last bunch of years. I don't know how many years, but of dwelling on past mistakes, and I'll get really entrenched in them, where they just take over me, and I just think about them, and then at night I'll think about them, and then they'll be gone for the day, but then I'll think about them, and they just absorb me. But recently I got kind of on this old thing that I had been on off and on for years, and I just like really spent a lot of time dwelling on it, and then I took a little bit of action, and I was able to work through it where I don't, it's kind of gone now. So for me, sort of that all that dwelling, maybe some of it was wasted, but if I hadn't dwelled on it, I'm not sure I would have been able to get rid of it. I don't know. It's gone now, and I think it's gone for forever. I see it in a whole different light than I did for previous times, over and over and over again throughout many years. Um, but if I hadn't dwelt on it, I think it would have just been like guilt or something that I couldn't get rid of in my life. And I'm not quite sure how it all happened, um, but it feels like it's at a whole different level of importance in my life than it was before.
Hmm.
So I don't know. Maybe I did it no longer. Maybe I dwelled on it, but maybe my view turned it from a mistake to acceptance. Maybe that's what happened. Somehow working through it and thinking about it and meditating about it. Maybe I finally, after all that time, turned it into an acceptance because I want to live my life now, not then. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe I just figured it out. But that was helpful what you said.
Oh, good. I think that one of the things that I had read was that if you just kind of look at it almost like a snapshot in time, that it's not that we're not supposed to look at the way we act, because we have to determine, did we just act skillfully, or could we have done that a little bit more skillfully? And then determine, if you look at it like that, then you'll know maybe the next time I'll handle that differently, and maybe I'll be a little bit more skillful next time. I think it's where that perseverating comes in. It's just looking at it, seeing it, being curious about it, and investigating it, a little bit. But then if you dwell on it, I mean, you just lost an hour, a day, a week of life, basically, because we are so stuck in the past. So I do understand how you can get stuck in that perseverating, but I think that's what this is talking about, is just kind of notice it, see what you could have done a little bit differently maybe, and then just be in the moment, honor the silence.
Maybe it's partly what the word dwell means. Dwells, can mean a lot of different things, but I have to think about more what I was just saying and what you said, what we're talking about. But I think in my mind, maybe it's a different word that I need, not dwell. But if I hadn't spent the time and energy that I had spent, I mean, maybe I could have solved it sooner, but it didn't happen. But if I hadn't dwelled on it, I don't think the way I did, and maybe it's that meditation to the point of acceptance that so I could let it go. But if I hadn't spent the time that I did on it, I'm not sure I would have ever been able to let it go. It would have still been there for me.
True. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to point out that difference between the sense of this precept that Choan brought out, in terms of this precept is is speaking to, not speaking to the faults of others. And yet our Western society tends to take it and turn it on ourselves and impose that sense of guilt and shame for our own actions. And then the dwelling comes from feeling guilty because we're feeling guilty and we're never right. And it turns into this internal spinning about our own sense of inadequacy, where the precept is really talking about how do we create harmony amongst each other by not speaking to others' faults. We've twisted it into, I can't think about anything but my faults. And so I just want to encourage, when we find ourselves caught in that, to remember that this sense of guilt and shame is a particular sickness that is carried in our society. And just know that this is something we're prone to. And we're not the only ones that tend to do this, that other people tend to do this as well. And be gentle with yourselves. And like, don't add guilt and shame on top of guilt and shame for dwelling or perseverating. Just recognize, oh, I'm stuck in that again. This is a chronic illness of American society. Let me see if I can let it go and take a deep breath and just let that tension out and reorient.
Thank you, Joshin.
I was going to add, thank you for that, Joshin. I was also going to point out, Trish, that you're illustrating so nicely how we take on the commentary of the precepts as koans. Like, so we take it on as like, you've introduced the koan of dwell. What is dwell? And this is exactly how we really integrate and know these, when we allow the commentary to drive us a little crazy of like, well, does it mean not to think about that at all? I don't think it means suppress, but how do I skillfully engage this? And like Choan was saying, how do I acknowledge, and then then it integrates contrition in there of like, how does that, so it's like you're illustrating like how, like, kind of that lived experience of like, how does it look for me, what does this mean? It's not totally clear, and yet there is a way through, and all of these are pointing us to these points of departure from our Buddha nature. So like, how would this dwelling take us away from our deep knowing and our deep enactment of our Buddha nature? So anyway, but it's just layers upon layers. So I thought it was great how you put that. It just really gives that sense of how we work our way through. So thanks for that. We've got just a couple minutes. Do you have any wrap-up thoughts there, Choan, or anything else you want to add or put out to the group before we?
Well, even as we were talking, I was thinking, we do have teachers also to support us. And I find that when I'm stuck or I'm dwelling, I tend to spend too long doing it instead of taking it into Sanzen and actually being able to bring it back to my practice. And because, the teachers never look at us and say, this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to do. They kind of give you an opportunity to bring it to them, and they kind of hand our practice back to us. And it seems like there's this clarity that comes out of meeting with our teachers. And I think sometimes for me, I just spend too long kind of being stuck in whatever I'm working through or trying to practice with. And I think if I just would go to my teacher a little bit sooner, I probably wouldn't have as long of dwelling that I do sometimes. So thanks so much, you guys.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Nancy and Choan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both so much for leading us in a great discussion and your questions. Yeah, thank you very much, and everyone that is here. So next week, we will be engaging in the precepts of do not praise self or blame others, and do not be mean with dharma or wealth. So your Dharma challenge for the week is to engage these two precepts in particular as completely as possible. And Shokai will be leading us in discussion on both of those great precepts next week. So I'm trying to think if there's any other things to mention. And also continue on, just to encourage you to continue on with the daily practice of reading the Kyoju Kaimon and the evening reflection practices for pulling the events of the mind of the day through the mind and just noticing any points of tension or contraction or tension or expansion. So, and again, thanks for coming together to do this study together. Something different comes out every time we do this practice together. So I really appreciate that. So with that, I will say the closing verse. So please make gasho. Abiding in this world, abiding in this ephemeral world, like a lotus in muddy water, the mind is pure and goes beyond. Thus we bow to Buddha. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, maha prajna paramita. Good night, everyone. Feel free to unmute yourself to say good night. And thanks again to Nancy and Choan.
Good night. Thanks, you guys.